Well, thank you, everyone. And with that, we come to an end of another very interesting session on mathematics behind provenance, observability, and automated reasoning concepts of security. And we were joined by Dr. Vireshwar Kumar, Dr. Anandita Banerjee, Dr. Shweta Agarwal, and the session was moderated by Professor Soumitra. We thank you all for joining us this evening and sharing with us your insights. And before I move on to our next session, I'd like to tell our viewers that this is going to be the final and last session of the day. And alongside the session that we have in the main auditorium now, which is going to be on cyber first, this and the next generation, we have the paper presentation session, which will now start. In stage one auditorium. And like I mentioned during the day, the paper presentation session will have selected papers, and those would be published in SERI paper proceedings. And in fact, they'll also be published on Taylor and France's website. And you may stay tuned in and join us for the paper presentation session in stage one. And for those of you who are interested in joining us for the panel discussion on Cyber First, can stay with us in the main auditorium. And we hope that you're all tweeting about the event using the hashtag SERI2021. You can tag us on the national COE handle. And we'd like to once again extend our gratitude to our partners, our publication partner, Taylor and Francis, and partner Tier 1, Microsoft. And along with that, once again, a quick reminder that we have two business lounges for our partner, Microsoft, and the attendees can click on the rooms on top navigation bar to access the lounges for interacting with the Microsoft team. So to begin this final session on Cyber First, I'd like to invite on stage Professor Farukh Kazi, Dean Research Development and Consultancy at Veermata Jijabai Technological Institute, or VJTI. Professor Pavel, founder and director of the Institute for Cyber Policy Studies, Israel, will also be sharing with us insights. And Professor Muttukrishnan Rajarajan, Director and Professor Security Engineering and Institute of Cybersecurity from the University of London, is also joining us this evening. And to moderate the session, we have amongst us Ms. Kirti, Seth, CEO of the Sector Skill Council for ITES at NASSCOM. So once again, an esteemed panel to talk to us on Cyber First, this and the next generation forward. To elaborate on it, let me hand it over to the session moderator, Ms. Seth, to take it forward from here. Thank you.
So, hi everyone. This is a really interesting panel to be part of, because I was just backstage and listening to all three of them talk to each other. And the words that were being bandied about were rather interesting. I heard Taliban, I heard cyber ransomware, I heard some radicalization, I heard all these interesting topics, which is what tells us that this is a really important topic to talk about, because before the pandemic hit us, digital was something that maybe companies talked about, governments talked about, cybersecurity was also something that they talked about. And things like AI, ML, cloud were not something that were in the normal parlance. Post the pandemic, we have entered a digital, interconnected world. And that's where suddenly everyone is talking about these words again. But if we really want to reap the benefits of digitization, it's security that is going to be the fundamental enabler. How people interact with technology, how decisions are made regarding information security. This is a really complicated issue, changing day by day. I don't know how many of you are following the news in India, where we have data privacy bills going on, where we have cybersecurity, which is in every government conversation today. So it's truly a topic that's really important. Investments into making cybersecurity education and awareness mainstream are really needed to, to help improve the overall security posture, security awareness in our country. This is not just, or in our country, across the globe actually. So this is not just something that we need to do as developers or as a business opportunity, but it's a really important societal group goal. And as I was eavesdropping on this conversation, you realize that there are things we are not even aware of as average citizens that are being looked at, controlled, we are being protected by exactly the kind of people that are being educated by all the academicians on this panel with me today. So, just to kick this off, I will start with a question. I will direct it to someone, but given that the three of you really know each other and are so well aware of each other's work, please feel free to raise your hand to say, I want to comment on this question and come in. Because while I have a set of questions that I have prepared for you, but in the pre-session when we talked about it, I realized that there are so many aspects to this, and we should try and cover them all. But let's see how that goes. So the first question is really what the fundamental reason this panel was set up was to talk about educating people. And this is not just for developers, but to users as well. So my question is, where does this responsibility of education lie? Does it lie with academia? Uh, Somewhere else? How is it going to even happen? And I'm going to start by asking the question to Professor Pavel, and then maybe the others can step in. And if we can keep the answers crisp and short, we will have time to get everyone's views in.
So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to be here, part of this distinguished panel and most interesting and important and enriching conference. Thank you very much for this question. Since when I've been asked what is cyberspace, I often say that for me it's kind of a huge umbrella that beneath we can find almost every topic. And if we are, let's take a university or an academic institution, for example, I think that nowadays, let's say almost, if not every department or faculty may relate to cyberspace. And of course, not only computer science and information technology and engineering, but we have topics and issues that relate to cyberspace in governments and politics, law, enforcement, business development, business administration, even geography. So for me, cyber and cyberspace and cyber issues and cyber topics are very wide. Therefore, cyber education is wide as well, which means, as far as I see it, the responsibility to give cyber education should be, once again, kind of umbrella that should include governmental initiatives, academic, the schools and high schools, and even to start in kindergarten with several basic initiatives, because we know that nowadays even our children in the kindergarten use tablets and very basic smartphones. So let's call it cyber hygiene. But at the end of the day, the responsibility to give such a cyber education should be a very broad one, not necessarily the Ministry of Education or academic institutions.
So, if I were to take that idea and go to Professor Kazi and say that if we talk about the broad baseness which Professor Pavel talked about, where do you think, I mean, is this cyber education, I mean, I'm talking about who's going to teach it, but I also probably want to look at who's going to learn it. So is it only for engineering students? Is it, how do we do this broad basing?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thank you, organizer, for giving me opportunity. I'd like to just stretch the answer of Professor Tal a bit more with respect to whose responsibility is this as far as cyber education is concerned. So of course, the rallying point can be academic institutes, no doubt about this. But if you can see who are those who are getting affected. So I would like to draw the attention of the title of our panel discussion itself. We are talking about cyber first, this and next generation. Actually, if you see, the most vulnerable sector is our children and the elderly people. So it should not be this and next generation, but previous, this, and the next generation probably. Because when you want to talk about cyber education, you also need to take into account the elderly people, the generation before us, and those who are not having much of the exposure to the technical know-how. And there comes the biggest problem with respect to cyber hygiene. So if you see the phishing attacks and the social engineering attacks which are happening recently, that innocent grandparents, they would like to talk to their grandchildren and they would like to use the social media as tools which are available, WhatsApp or any other kind of thing, and suddenly they find a link which is saying that click so and then you will be getting these things. And this generation before us was not having such kind of phishing type of exposure earlier. So I think along with the educational institutes, there are a lot of NGOs which are coming up in now, making aware this elderly group of people, children basically, who are exposed to the cyber bullying because of their so much of time that they spend on the digital space. So along with the educational institute, I think there is a lot of work which is currently happening and need to be done from the civil societies and the NGOs. The third thing that I'm noticing very recently, with at least in India particularly, is with the last year's so many news reporting coming up that energy sector is under cyber attack. So along with the educational institute, at least in India, I'm seeing a lot of traction coming up for the training or cyber education through Ministry of Power or Central Electricity Authority. So those utilities as well are actually conducting certain awareness program. Some of them are conducting it through educational institutes. Some of them are creating their in-house capacity building measures as well. So I think along with the educational institutes, these NGOs, civil societies, the groups which are getting affected, they themselves are coming forward. And what I feel is the cyber hygiene, basic cyber hygiene, is now becoming part of our curriculum as well. So many school curriculum and syllabi are now having at least one or two modules which talks about the cyber hygiene and how they can protect their digital identity within the cyberspace and how can they safely navigate their way through the digital space. So I think nowadays a complete ecosystem is getting created so as to create this cyber awareness and the cyber education.
So thanks, Professor Kazi. I hear you mention the government multiple times. So is there a role for government in creating cyber awareness? Professor Muttukrishnan, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I think the wrong person to ask this question, because I was involved 10 years ago with the Indian government on cyber education with Farooq's boss, Professor Dhiren Patel, as part of at that time it was MAITI, and I think, or DAITI, now it's MAITI. He spent a lot of time. And as these guys are mentioning here, one of the challenges I find through this educational awareness program was there was a lot of money allocated, but when you give it to the professors, they don't really get into the real world problems and start sorting the challenges that you face on a day-to-day life. And what I see it, as colleagues have mentioned here, both my panelists, that the best way to do is I do, for example, a hacking exercise at a kid's school between the age of 10 to 12, 15. Initially, when I started doing a robotic car hacking, I was told that the kids went home and told the parents, this professor came and told us how to hack into autonomous cars. And the head teacher wrote an email to me saying, Professor, you shouldn't be teaching about hacking. I said, the problem is, being an academic for 25 years, there is no passion in kids. You start telling my daughter, who is in university now, cyber, she says, what is this about? So there is a very selective group of us who understand what it means. And I think the only way is to start pumping this into from a younger generation. And this is where I started off. And I see a big skills gap that we see. And I think this is what it's about, how to kind of transform the next generation with more knowledge and understanding of what these threats are. So some of the things we have been trying to do as part of the interdisciplinary center is to create cyber games so that the kids are more educated from early on. What are the threats they see? So try to bring interesting games for them so they engage more to understand the real threats. And I think it is a process we need to start very early on, as colleagues mentioned here, rather than just building it into the curriculum. As Farooq mentioned, I think all undergraduate programs now have some kind of cyber being built in. So I think from the government agenda, every government has an agenda, and politicians are useless and they don't do many things in the right format. I think it has to start from home, and people have to start, you know, educating the kids. And a lot of parents don't have time to educating the kids. So I find the best way is to educate the kids through these fun activities at school. And like, for example, I'm a STEM ambassador in my local county, where I cover around 20 schools, where I go and talk about all fun activities through which you try to tell them what are the dangers you might encounter by interacting with this web page, or do this way, or design something this way. So I think it is a process we need to start early on, rather than just incorporating into a university curriculum or trying to get the governments. There are so many policies. UK has multiple policies. We defined recently something called cyber body of knowledge, and that is a document of 180 pages. No one wants to read it. So I think the problem is it has to become part of our daily life. And as Farukh mentioned about phishing attacks, because now most of the UK companies put on the emails, this email originated from outside the organization. Schools do that. This email is from another outside entity. So I think bringing awareness by integrating this into the existing environment is the best way, rather than having policies defined. And my personal experience with many governments is there are very good policies, but no one reads these policies and no one implements these policies. Take, for example, IT Act of India, how long it took to change the privacy into Indian. And when I presented privacy in India, I was told, according to the culture in India, a parent can open a child's post. So, Professor, you're talking about privacy in India. And this is the problem. The mindset has to start early on, and people have to then change their behavior. So that's my take on this. We have started on, but I think the best way is through games and interesting interactive activities where we should educate the children.
Professor, we've lost. Okay, he stopped. So, well, that's a nice radical take on things. Very clear point of view on what role government has to play. I think all three of you have talked about, cyber hygiene and what we need to do to educate the user. You talked about games and you talked about making it interesting, involving the parents. Very practical points of view. But when we look at curriculum, the other side of it, the people who are building all these solutions or applications or things that we use. Professor Kazi talked about what grandmothers are using, and what people in daily lives, they're using these things where they're open to making to vulnerable. They become vulnerable. So people who are developing these solutions, is the curriculum up to scratch? Sorry, is the curriculum, are they prepared for it? You mentioned that all computer science curriculum actually has elements of cybersecurity, but that's not what one is experiencing. And I think, Professor Pavel, you had a point of view on that. We need to do something about that piece as well.
Indeed, thank you. I want to emphasize my conclusion that the same as education is general education is kind of social responsibility to minimize social gaps. I think cyber education and digital life education should be our social responsibility. And when I say our, it starts with everyone, with the family cell, businesses and corporates and society and the countries. It should be our responsibility to provide this basic nowadays current knowledge for everyone, as both professors mentioned. And in order not only to minimize the digital gap, but also to provide everyone with those needed skills that they will be able to manage themselves, and on one hand to find relevant jobs, but on the other hand, to protect themselves, their digital existence, their privacy and anonymity, what left from it. So I think that it's our obligation to provide such education in order to give everyone the basic opportunities and to minimize this gap. Regarding the academic teaching, from my experience, I can give you the example that I have a course of such an introduction course of cybersecurity essentials, and in one of the academic institutions, the target is the third and fourth year in computer science. And when I spoke with them about DDoS, ransomware, malware, SQL injection, nothing technical, just the concept, just what it's mean, what is malware, what is SQL injection. Suddenly I heard from those students, once again, computer science third and fourth year, that they do not know what it is. And I was amazed because you expect from computer science to know what is DDoS attack or SQL injection. But I understood that they thought how to program or how to think like programmer, but no one gave them, a bit of a broader perspective. Okay, you wrote your code, but what may be the consequence? What may be vulnerabilities in your code? How can your code be manipulated? What should be secure code? So I think that we need, in this, just case, just an example, not only to provide the basic knowledge, here in this case in a computer science department, of how to write a code or how to improve your code and to provide the best code that you can, but also to think perhaps like an attacker, or how can my code be manipulated. And that's to give, a broader perspective, that in this case, it will be not only for the benefit of the students and the knowledge, but it will be also for the benefit of the organization. Probably you will understand much more what are the threats. How can my code be manipulated? And in this case, perhaps in the future, if there will be more synergy, for in this example, between the programmers and the security officers, perhaps in the future, those programmers will think a bit more about security when they're writing the code.
And if they do that, I think the applications that they are building or the solutions they are proposing will have security inbuilt, rather than relying on the user to take certain actions. Hopefully, security will be inbuilt into the design.
Indeed.
That's a great point, and I think that's something that all academicians who have these programs should think about, to say how much of this is actually inbuilt into the computer science and IT curricula. But Professor Kazi, is cybersecurity something that just needs to be with the computer science and IT streams, or engineering streams? Is that how we're going to be looking at building out this, the skill gap that Professor Muttukrishnan talked about, which is huge. The opportunities are huge and the requirement is huge. But who's the target audience for this, for educating them on what cybersecurity is?
Yeah, I think this is a very nice question. And believe me, you might get something interesting answer out of this, because we used to feel that cybersecurity is some domain which belongs to computer and IT guys, basically the engineering or to some extent, we still restrict cybersecurity to science and technology people. But my personal experience of interacting with various people who work on specifically on the penetration testing, VAPT domain, to my surprise as well, I realized that many of them are actually commerce graduate, and to some extent, some of those were MCA graduate. But believe me, majority of them are non-computer science background. This is surprising. The reason is for this kind of VAPT sector, because there is one more thing I would like to bring to your notice when we talk about cyber security. We talk this as a monolithic term, and that's a misnomer basically, and very much guiding our policymakers in wrong direction of focusing only on computer and IT engineering student when they talk about the cyber education or cyber security. We need to basically look into a wider horizon, getting into the people who have more luxury of free time. The reason I'm using this particular term is a lot of cybersecurity depends upon the tools, and the people who explore the tools are those people who have luxury of time. And that is the reason you will find that many of non-engineering students or graduates are actually well performing when you talk about cybersecurity. You look into the certain empaneled agencies which do VAPT testing, and you'll find out majority of them are with non-engineering background. You may find non-engineering in Big Four who do a lot of VAPTs for critical infrastructure, etc. So this is something is very interesting point actually, that our policymakers, particularly those who try to spot the talent in the cybersecurity domain, they need to look into more non-obvious sources of talent. For example, if I speak about cyber spear phishing or social engineering, best of the talent you can find out in Jamtara or in Jharkhand, because they are the people who understand actually how to trigger the psychology for the people to connect to the link which is having some kind of malicious intentions. So when you talk about the cybersecurity, you need to think about the different perspectives of this. So there is vulnerability assessment, penetration testing. There is something which comes about phishing or social engineering. Of course, engineering science will come when you talk about something related to cryptography, where high-end mathematics is required, and you can then surely talk about science and technology graduate. But not every time. There are many fields associated with the cyber securities which can very well be addressed by the people belonging to non-computer science background. In fact, just to on a lighter note, the biggest computer engineering company is run by IIT's metallurgy graduate, Google. So we are actually searching talent in the obvious places. For cybersecurity, we need to start searching the talent in non-obvious places. I think that is something that we are missing right now. We are focusing too much on engineering, and that too we are focusing on computer and IT or computer science engineering. In fact, within engineering also, personally, I am in this teaching field for more than 25 years now. In cybersecurity, in my own institute, I feel that the talent is even better comparable in mechanical engineering, production engineering, vis-a-vis computer science or IT engineering when you talk about cyber security, because it's actually something which is skill based, passion driven. The one who is having passion can excel very well in the cyber security, not necessarily from engineering background, and that too not specifically from computer or IT engineering background.
So thanks for that. That's actually music to my ears, because as I mentioned, I lead the skilling charter for NASSCOM and for the IT industry in India, and we are constantly exhorting people to say that, come and get skilled. There's all this opportunity out there, but this will give me enough ammunition to go and evangelize this more powerfully. And maybe I invite you sometime to those sessions as well. I'm going to go to Professor Muttukrishnan now. We've been talking about skilling and getting a wider how people even from non-engineering backgrounds can do better. And you talked about the skill gap. So we've been hearing, we hear a lot about AI and cloud, and these are skills that everyone is aware of. When will Cybersecurity's Day in the Sun come? Is it here, or do we need to do something to get it to that level of popularity?
I think the problem with cybersecurity is not as sexy as AI or ML. Uh, I have 3 startups myself, and I look at crappy ML technologies being raised 1 million, 3 million in a year, whereas I have in the previous panel they spoke about fully homomorphic. We have a practical fully homomorphic encryption technique, which I spoke to some of our GCHQ, some of the most talented people you'll find in intelligence. Even for them, it wasn't sexy enough because I don't have a front end like this to show these flows. The data shows there is a cat and there is a dog. I just said, this is the crap that gets out of encrypted data. And they said, what is this? We just can't see anything. So even at that level, you cannot explain security. How do you explain security to a layman on the street? And this is the biggest challenge you find. So although security has been around for longer than these techniques that have been brought in, people find it very easy to manipulate data using visualization tools to show how this ML or AI is having advantage to a specific business. But every time I do either an academic pitch or an investment pitch or an innovation pitch, it's so hard to have Alice and then go, and then people get lost. The minute Alice walks away and the numbers come in, people see what crap you are showing now. It's all after there is encryption, decryption, coding, key management. No one understands that. Even in simple term, you try to explain in a layman term, people still, even yesterday I had a great meeting with the government. They said, Raj, you have an amazing technology, but I still can't understand what you're trying to explain to me. And this is after 3 years of me explaining this tech. And this is not just myself. This is the problem with security. It's so hard to communicate security to the layman or even to the enterprise managers. I've spoken to so many CTOs at senior level at Thales, IBM, Microsoft. They all understand it at a very high level. But when you start going to the nuts and bolts of security, even the CTOs don't understand what is going on. And this is the fundamental problem I have. Like being a guy who has academic hat on and trying to be entrepreneur is very, very challenging. It is, that education part, even at a CTO, CIO level or C level guy is a big challenge. And I'm with 2 of my PhD students building a tool for quantifying risk to show senior C-level managers, because risk is something that I don't like it, because you say 1 to 10, somebody says 1 to 5, and on the sky you say 4 or 3 and 2, and then you come with controls. What bloody risk is that? So I'm trying to quantify the risk basing some Bayesian networks. And then the minute I started talking Bayesian, and the CTO says, what is this, professor? Some mathematics now. You say, oh, statistics. They lose the interest. So now what I'm doing, I'm with my students, a nice sexy tool, because you put some numbers in, it grows some nice. This is the economic impact of this kind of cyber attacks on your network. Wow, that looks like. Now my biggest threat is this. They don't want to know the Bayesian belief network because they don't want to go into that. They just want to see this nice tool. And I think this is the same information that we did 20 years ago, but this nice tool with some numbers they plug in, they think now they can measure the risk. So they are more qualified to make an investment decision where the company should invest in the next 5 years. So for me, AI and ML is taking off much faster than cyber because it's hard to explain cyber. But at the same time, there is no ML and there is no AI without cyber. But people are now starting to realize with more AI, now we submitted 5 proposals. Everybody is asking, Raj, we need to do federated learning. But everybody is asking privacy preserving. How do you do this? I said, you'd use the same bloody privacy preserving that's been 10 years ago. But now the federated learning has been around. Even Google, Microsoft, IBM, they're all working, but they all want now to focus on privacy because they can't mine the data unless you protect the privacy first. So it is always an afterthought because personally, it's so hard to explain to even technical people and C-level managers that, or even CTOs, CIOs, what security means to the organization. And this is the challenge. And multidisciplinary is a very interesting angle. The main reason I set this institute at City, I'm the director for this, and we cut across all areas from law to sociology to, and Farukh spoke about and Tal spoke about. So I recently submitted a UK government project on fintech with my business school. It's about how to establish open banking platforms so that fintech can grow, so that you don't have this something like an aggregator or a broker in the middle. So I think, I work with law colleagues. After Brexit, we don't follow GDPR. So how do you look at national laws when it goes the cyber across the boundaries? we did I spoke about radicalization project. I couldn't harvest data. If anybody from Facebook, you can sue me. We couldn't harvest data in European territory because by law I cannot collect. I went to my friends at ICT in Israel because it's outside European Commission, and we crawled through and created enough data sets, and we still did the project. And then the European Commission asked us, where the hell did you find this data? I said, this wasn't collected in GDPR. This was outside GDPR. I said, if worse come to us, I'll go to India and I'll collect more data and do further research. And they really got annoyed, and we still passed through the project. So these are some of the fundamental issues. But I think cyber is a very multidisciplinary topic now. And we teach, I teach across psychology, sociology, because I think technology is out there. Cryptography is there. We have amazing cryptographers, but the bigger challenge are human factors and psychology. I think if you can understand these two, then you can really solve a lot of cybersecurity issues easily. That's my take.
Thanks for that. Lots of questions that are coming up from what you said. And I wanted to ask a question on privacy, but before I do that, I'm going to ask Professor Kazi and Professor Pavel to come in on this whole thing of how do you explain security? Because if you cannot explain it, how do you inspire people to learn it? And what's the WIFM for actually, for governments to propose it, for companies to pay for it, for people to learn it? I mean, it's at the heart of the question. If you can't explain it, how do you explain the value? Do you find that too? I'll go to Professor Kazi and then to Professor Pavel.
Yes. So a very interesting answer I can give it to you, because exactly same thing we were experiencing for almost a decade or so when we were working with many energy utilities basically. So when some 5-6 years back, we started interacting to power utilities and telling them that cybersecurity indeed is very important for you. And they used to outrightly reject our all ideas of cybersecurity, saying that no, we are air gap network and this kind of things cannot happen with us. And luckily then the Stuxnet and Ukrainian power grid attack happened. So the best way to convince people about cybersecurity is, in your presentation, put the first slide about the Stuxnet and the second slide about the Ukrainian power grid attack. And then suddenly the attention span of all your audience will be something like you are trying to, means God only have actually come through you as an avatar, and you are trying to save them from the next cyber attack which is going to happen on their organization. So if you start talking, as Professor Raj said, that in terms of cryptography, in terms of mathematics, in terms of other things, they will never understand. And the only way by which you can convince these people to look cybersecurity more seriously is about portraying all those cyber attacks which has happened in the recent past, and then try to drag their attention towards this menace called as the cyber vulnerability and cyber attacks. Particularly when I work and interact with the people working in critical infrastructure, my journey has been made much smoother by the media coverage which has happened for last 2 years or so, including the recent Mumbai incident of last year. So now convincing people about the cyber security has become much more easier ever since such kind of cyber attacks are now growing. So in fact, in a what we can say silver lining, we can say that the awareness about the boardroom people who are main key decision makers in terms of releasing the money, funding, and the budget for such kind of research projects and awareness program has been actually, our life is made simple by the couple of cyber attacks which has happened in the recent past. So I agree with you and with Professor Raj as well that earlier, unlike AI, machine learning, which was supposed to be much glamorous, and the investors and venture capitalists and the board decision makers who are pumping in billions of dollars for AI ML, the kind of appreciation that cybersecurity domain was receiving was nowhere anywhere proportional to that. But thankfully, with the recent cyber incidences which has happened, suddenly their attention has came to the cybersecurity as well. So I think maybe our journey for next couple of years will be made easy by those cyber attacks. So in a wrong sense, we say that periodically some kind of incidents to awaken people and policymakers in this direction.
So I was just going to say that it's only in a cybersecurity conference where you can consider that these attacks are a good thing in some shape or form. We'll all take it in the right spirit. Professor Pavel, what is your view on this?
Indeed, I totally agree with both professor that on one hand, all those very tech aspects of cyberspace and cryptography, as you mentioned, professor, are sometimes hard to explain to C-level, as you mentioned. But I totally agree with Professor Farukh that we need, and nowadays I think it's easy because there's so many cyber events and cyber incidents nowadays, day by day. And even for my presentations, when I want to prove something or to demonstrate something, I just need to find the relevant hack, the relevant cyber incidents, and to demonstrate my cause. Um, the issue is that to motivate, in this case, the students, to expand their knowledge. And if I look from our academic institutions, I'm the head of cyber studies under the Information Systems School. We are now in a peak of a number of students, and we have a kind of day track, and we have an evening track for students that work during the day. And we have now a peak of the number of students because there are much more students that would like to study about cyber and cyberspace. And what we are trying to do, and this, as I mentioned, the umbrella approach of mine, is to include courses and to provide a wide range of knowledge. For example, my courses are the first is social aspects in the cyberspace, and the second is terrorism in the internet, terrorism in the cyberspace, which means to give them broad perspective of what is the cyberspace. I encourage my students try to read about daily cyber events, not necessarily from local media outlets. It can be even WhatsApp, Telegram channels, Facebook group, or of course a global media outlet. But please read, because when you expose to cyber events that happen, you have not only much more knowledge, but your perspective is totally changed. You do not look from your local perspective, but you now understand, just for example, that cyber attacks during COVID-19 against the healthcare sector from the global perspective. So basically nowadays, as Professor Farukh just mentioned, it's easier to demonstrate the importance and the necessity of cyber studies, cyber knowledge, and not only not only within the academic institutions. I do believe in all my heart that we need to provide those. It can be called cyber hygiene. It can be, be issues of anonymity and privacy. But we should provide relevant digital, even if it's not to call it cyber, but we need to provide digital knowledge to everyone from the kindergarten to the third age. It's our obligation.
But thanks for that. And I think I've just you touched upon privacy, and even Professor Muttukrishnan talked about the GDPR in some countries, not in some countries, and where data is available. But if we look at it from the whole cyber first, and coming back to the title of the session, cyber first, and this and the next generation, is our current generation, I mean, I want to say the young generation, but actually I would include all of us into it, to say this whole issue of privacy. uh, is it a continuum of when we talk about cybersecurity? Is it a part of cybersecurity? And what is it that we need to do? How do we build awareness around the importance of privacy? Where do we even begin? And we have about 3 minutes left. So if I can just have, I can start with Professor Muttukrishnan on that, and then just go to Professor Kazi and Professor Pavel on this. So what do we need to educate people on privacy, and how?
I don't think we can educate people. I think people know what the privacy is. So I think this is somewhere I think governments can make an upper hand on it. And I see, for example, the level of pressure that the big boys have been put under by the US government, the European government. They really make every attempt now not to tamper with personal data, with right to be forgotten. There is a new GDPR, there's a new change that's coming for uh, AI models in Europe, which is just in draft stage. And I was part of the uh, commission which was reviewing this draft document. That how do you make sure that the data that you're processing is transparent to the individual who actually owns this data? And under right to be forgotten, if they ask you to remove that data, how do you then still maintain the accuracy of the machine learning models, which is a very hard problem to address in terms of maintaining privacy at the same time creating the utility of the data. So I think the way I see privacy can be influenced is through government policies and laws, which, as far as I see in Europe, it is the level of fines that has been imposed in the last year or so during lockdown, starting with the British Airways fine, and colleagues spoke about, and then the ICO, our Information Commissioner's Office, put a heavy fine on Marriott hotels. And now, after that, I teach on the business school, Cyber Essentials, which is every company. I teach around 300 plus startups in London to get Cyber Essential, which is a certification to show the government that you have the basic hygiene in place to protect against any external or internal cyber threats. So this kind of certification and kind of laws and guidelines defined by governments is the best way. Then once it's like been pushed by the government, we all have to follow. But otherwise, people are aware. In the Europe, more people are now aware than 5 years ago how Facebook or other big players use their data. But still, we continue to use it because we want some of the services they provide. And that is where this kind of we are willing to share our privacy for specific utilization of services we have. And that's the biggest challenge. As I say, the only way is to unplug our computers, which none of us will do. We'll all talk everything. But in the next minute I will do is go back into my Instagram and see what is the next message. So we cannot live without this connectivity. So we are aware of privacy, but I see the only way is not through education. I think people are aware in the European or Western world. It's just the government policies have to be very stringent and hard so that it gets into the system quite easily. Thank you.
Very, very interesting. Professor Pavel, your thoughts?
Well, of course, there is an importance of laws and regulations and certificates and initiatives like GDPR and the right to be forgotten. No doubt at all. But as you say, Professor Rajarajan, I do not know if you'll take the layman in the street and ask him what do we know and what does he know about the right to be forgotten or GDPR or a cyber policy or anonymity or privacy, he'll know something about it. So it's important to have indeed regulations and certificates and governmental initiatives. But I think that I don't know if more important, but at least the same importance is to education, because if you have the right to be forgotten, but if you ask someone on the street, what is the right to be forgotten? Are you aware for your right to be forgotten by Google, for example? And he knows nothing about it, so he have no right to be forgotten. And if there is a GDPR, but nobody knows about it, I mean, the ordinary end users. So what are our rights? And do we use our rights as well? So regulations are important. but the implementation of such and is through education. We can have certificates, but if it will not infiltrate into the end user the importance of certificate, go study and improve yourself and knowledge, it will be just certificate without infiltration of the knowledge.
But can I just challenge you on that point? Because I think as a layman, my wife will never go and read a GDPR. So even if I educate her the 42 pages of GDPR, she still doesn't know what it means.
Of
So
course.
the only way I see is how these companies like Google and Facebook have been pushed into put alerts and things. And the way I think the education happened is we have been warned that this data might be used, and I quickly see a snapshot of this data, and I say, okay, this means they are going. So when that is being enforced by policy, and that the company is being expected to follow those guidelines, then otherwise none of us are going. I'm not a lawyer, you're not, many of us are not. We are never going to read all these laws and regulations to go through it. So I see this has to be a built-in part of every system. Privacy has to be built in so that it protects us, rather than me thinking, oh, do I have right to be forgotten? Do I need to look at my cookies? Do I need to go and delete my history? I shouldn't be thinking. The
Professor
system should
Rajarajan,
provide.
I'm sorry, I have to come in between here. We are our time is up, so we need to wrap up. Ms.
Sure.
Seth, just a quick humble reminder: we have to wrap
Thank
up
you.
this session now.
Sure, thanks a lot. I just request Professor Kazi for any last closing remarks for a very interesting discussion. But everyone's had their say, so I just leave it to you to end this session.
Well, I totally agree with what Professor Raj said with respect to the privacy, because this is something which is required to be enforced by a strong regulation by government, because the players who are involved in this are having superpower basically. So we need to have, at least country like India, we need to have strong regulation so as to ensure the privacy. I do agree with whatever Professor Raj said with respect to this.
Well, thank you so much. As I figured out even when I met you earlier, was this is a topic that is very vast, very broad, but tremendous insights. I've learned a lot in this session personally. Enjoyed it thoroughly. Thank you very much. And I'm sure this is going to spawn a number of panel discussions and talks. So looking forward to educating this and the next generation. So thank you very much and namaste.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
Take
very
care,
much.
guys. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. With that, we have come to an end of our today's program. This last session of Cyber First, this and next session was a final session. We'd like to thank our moderators and all of our panelists for being with us on today's program and sharing with us their valuable expertise. And I also finally invite Kevin Glenn, Marketing Manager with the National VJTI, to finally give us and a phone vote. Over to you, Kevin.
Hello everyone. I would like to thank our Tier 1 partner Microsoft for supporting SERI and publication partner Taylor and Francis for publishing the SERI paper proceedings. With 60 plus speakers and 13 plus enriching sessions, I hope it was a great experience for all of you today. Promoting cybersecurity research is one of the main agenda of National COE, and we have launched utilities for the cybersecurity enthusiasts like you all. So please feel free to visit our website www.ncoe.in and click on utilities on the top navigation bar and enjoy 45 days of free trial. I look forward to seeing you all next year. Till then, please take care and be cyber smart. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you.